Ukraine, Russia,
forces,
Russia,
nations, forces, Russia, nations, forces, Ukraine,
Russia, forces, Ukraine, forces,
Russia,
Ukraine,
nations, Russia, nations, Russia, nations,
Ukraine,
Russia, nations, Ukraine, forces, Russia, nations, Ukraine. The earlier NATO is the whole with Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, forces,
Ukraine,
forces,
Ukraine,
Ukraine, forces, Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine,
Russia.
forces, Russia,